Halo Wars released in February 2009. It was a pretty remarkable game for its time. It was the first non-shooter Halo game and an untested real-time strategy on the console, a genre that was often regarded as impossible to play with a controller. Developer Ensemble Studios managed to defy expectations and deliver a quality, if niche, Halo title. It's been 8 long years since its release, but something has happened. Microsoft listened to the die-hard fans and released the sequel, Halo Wars 2. While there's a lot to say about Halo Wars 2 from a gameplay or multiplayer standpoint, we're interested in its story. So let's dive into the campaign and the story 343 Industries and Creative Assembly have crafted. Halo Wars' main strength was that it was a simple story told with recognizable characters. Its heroes were the brainy scientist Anders, stoic commander Cutter, hot-headed marine Forge, and sardonic AI Serena were familiar with from countless other films and games. The plot, too, was so stock to Halo it could be considered a classic trope at this point. Outmatched humans fighting Covenant find a Forerunner MacGuffin that could tilt the tables of the war. In order to stop it from being used against them, the UNSC are forced to destroy it. In the words of Cortana,
"Not a very original plan, but we know it'll work."
But while Halo Wars dealt in tropes and familiar situations, it executed everything really well and still managed to add depth to the Halo universe, giving us our first look at a shield world or the battle-scarred world of Harvest. Subtle connections to previous games and novels were there for eagle-eyed players, and standout cinematics and voice acting elevated the material. In the rough outlines, Halo Wars 2 follows on much the same way as its predecessor. Its story remains remarkably simple. The world of Halo has grown far more complex than the simple UNSC versus Covenant of earlier games and novels, but despite working to integrate the unstuck-in-time crew of the UNSC Spirit of Fire with current world affairs, Halo Wars 2 keeps the stakes clear, the story simple, and the cast of characters minimal. The game begins with Spirit of Fire's crew awakening at the edge of another Forerunner installation, the Ark. Anders is raring to explore this new installation, while Cutter is a bit more preoccupied with finding out what's been going on in the wider universe while they've been adrift for more than 25 years, as well as who plucked Spirit of Fire from its previous course and took it out here to the edge of the galaxy. After a quick cutscene that introduces the characters and gives the briefest of chances for veterans to say goodbye to Forge and Serena, the plot keeps rolling, and soon Spirit of Fire is trying to find the source of an encrypted transmission from the Ark's surface. The 3 Spartans, Jerome, Alice, and Douglas, disembark to the surface, finding the ruins of a UNSC research outpost and logistics AI, Isabel, who warns them to leave quickly. Investigating, the Spartans come across the brute Atriox and get utterly pummeled. In many ways, Halo Wars was the first game in which we saw Spartans be as fast, acrobatic, and lethal as Eric Nyland's novels had always told fans they were, and so having Halo Wars 2's antagonists show up immediately and defeat those guys immediately sets stakes, introduces the enemy, and gives him heft. 343 has taken criticism in other media for using dead Spartans as a shorthand to demonstrate an enemy's power, the deaths of Spartan 4s and Black Team in Escalation being a notable example. But ending the first short mission with Douglas injured and Alice possibly KIA is more effective than any of these previous character sacrifices. Isabel quickly fills in everyone on how Atriox and the Banished showed up and killed everyone. Isabel's advice is to run, but Cutter instead gives a rousing speech that despite being an old, just one undermanned ship, he and his crew are ready to do their duty and stop Atriox, whatever the cost. Launching operations to the Ark's surface, the forces of Spirit of Fire managed to disrupt Atriox's supply lines and control over the Ark's teleportation nodes, finishing off one of Atriox's lieutenants, Decimus, when Spirit of Fire comes under attack from Atriox's air fleet, including a CAS-class assault carrier. Anders suggests using the Halo ring world kept at the Ark as a signal buoy, launching the ring to its intended location near enough to contact the UNSC in friendly space. Isabel contrives a way to get the Ark's automated Sentinel defense forces aggravated, turning them against Atriox's assault carrier. In a pitched battle on the Halo, Anders manages to launch the ring with her aboard, promising Cutter that she'll bring help soon. Entrusting that Anders will manage to bring back up Cutter and Isabel plan strategy against the Banished, while Atriox plots his own next moves. And so the story ends, for now. One of the biggest differences between the original game and its sequel is the much lighter touch of Blur's cinematics, which spread roughly the same amount of running time across fewer movies scattered through the campaign. Instead, we get a lot more in-game vignettes and mission-breathing dialogue a la StarCraft to carry the story forward. Overall, given that the original game basically relied entirely on the cutscenes to tell the story, I think it's a positive for Halo Wars 2 to go this route. The only major flaw in this approach is the curious use of static animated portraits rather than animated ones, a downgrade from the original game that feels almost cheap in comparison. There's not a lot in the game that requires previous Halo knowledge, but for people who might feel lost, there are the Phoenix logs, akin to a codex found in other sprawling games with deep lore, and it's hands down the most welcome lore addition to a Halo game in recent memory. Logs are unlocked by completing objectives in the campaign and finding scattered collectibles, but in comparison to the innocuous black boxes in the first game, 343 and Creative Assembly opted to make the Phoenix logs easy to hunt down. In the first mission, the luminous Phoenix logs basically serve as waypoints on the map, and they show up on the player's minimap as well. It's a clear lesson learned from previous Halo games where important supplemental knowledge was locked behind terminals and external material. If you want to know more about what each building of your base does or more about the characters you see on the screen, the Phoenix logs supply plenty. I sincerely hope 343 looks towards this and previous efforts like the Combat Evolved Anniversary's Connect-Only library feature and makes them equivalent in every game going forward. It's a simple way to help players catch up on the sprawling world they jump into with each game. The Phoenix logs also offer a great opportunity to dive into aspects of the canon that don't really merit being part of the main story, but still enrich it, and they absolutely capitalize on the opportunity. Inside the logs, we get tidbits that demonstrate the horrifying brutality of the Banished, such as the regular execution of panicky grunts, the premature death of the Lokogo worms that pilot Atriox's Scarab platforms, and that the engineers the Banished enslaved are tortured endlessly by the Ark's request for repairs that they cannot answer. The logs in the game itself also capitalize on the small tidbits of established lore rather brilliantly, such as Anders using the Halo's ability to selectively vent portions of the ring into space, first seen in a Combat Evolved Anniversary terminal, as 343 Guilty Spark frittered away his time in isolation. Even the Librarian's plans for humanity to inherit the mantle are briefly discussed by Anders, who, understandably, is a bit creeped out by the level of control she desired. Another key strength of Halo Wars 2's campaign is that it doesn't lean heavily on them. While fans of the series will automatically know what the Ark is and its significance, it never assumes that knowledge is a given, and it doesn't dwell too much on the history outside of the logs. Basically, the only knowledge someone would need to understand the game's story is the previous games had humans and ships fighting aliens. It's a pretty low bar to clear, and it generally is to the game's benefit. I say generally because there are points where that focus on a streamlined story sometimes skips over spots that could use elaboration. 2/3 of the way through the campaign, the plot point that the Ark creates halos comes out of nowhere if you're a new player, and more pressingly, no one on Spirit of Fire seems all that surprised by the revelation. The implicit assumption here is Isabel relates a lot of history to the crew off-screen, but shortchanges new and returning players of some payoffs. Likewise, fans are robbed of some pretty large character moments, especially regarding Spirit of Fire's crew. Cutter gets to give a rousing speech to Isabel about not backing down in the face of adversity, but it's really the only mention in the entire game of what Cutter or the crew must feel about getting back home decades after their loved ones might have moved on, grown up, or passed away. The arrival of Spirit of Fire in the modern world, a world that regarded them as lost, a world where their old war was already won, was a chance for a lot of pathos, but it's not touched on. The reason may be a desire to keep things light and not focus on the events of the first game to avoid alienating new players, but as a result, we lose a chance to learn more about these characters. The missed opportunity of Spirit of Fire's homecoming is compounded by the fact that most of the recurring characters get very little screen time. Anders and Cutter both have flashes of dialogue that suggest how they might have changed since the first game, but it's never explored. The repercussions of the events of the first game are covered more in the original game's post-Halo Wars timeline entries than in most of the follow-up game. Instead, they mostly remain in their archetypal roles, with Anders figuring out a technical solution and plumbing the depths of Forerunner relics, and Cutter being command material. Surprisingly, the only returning characters who get any major added depth in Halo Wars are the Spartans. In the first game, Red Team were basically just hero units with different guns and voices. In Halo 2, though, far more time is spent with them, and their Phoenix logs give full backgrounds into their early lives. While the fleshing out of Red Team is excellent, the only character to get a complete arc in the game is newcomer Isabel. AIs in Halo have always been a study of contrast, and where Serena was basically Cortana with a snark and sarcasm meter turned up to 11, Isabel comes off as far more human, alternating between being terrified, angry, and vengeful. She and Jerome form a working relationship during the game that strikes one as awfully reminiscent of the Master Chief and Cortana in the first Halo games, and it's a welcome dynamic to return, even though I was left wondering how a Mark IV suit of armor somehow had the ability to house an AI. By the end of the game, Isabel has proven herself a valuable addition to the Spirit of Fire, but in destroying the assault carrier and enduring conviction, she also gets a measure of revenge against the Banished for the death of her human charges, and we get a brief taste of just how much her failure to protect them weighs on her. But what about the new villain in the mix? Introducing the Banished as a shadow group in opposition to the Covenant even before the Great Schism, at first blush presents some serious lore issues, but to 343's credit, the integration of the Banished is remarkably clean, and in fact answers a lingering question posed by previous universe material, most prominently in this scene from Halo Wars.
The war with the humans will require a great deal many more machines than we can currently muster.
I will take what we have.
And leave us defenseless?
Until now, it's been an open question of what the Covenant could have possibly been defenseless against besides humanity, but the Banished can clearly fill that role. The Phoenix Logs also reveal that Oni slowly became aware of Atriox and the Banished in the closing stage of the Human-Covenant War, and watched as the discord sown by the dissolution of the Covenant offered him a chance to grab more materiel and persons to his cause. But while 343 has effectively managed to build up the Banished as a successor to the Covenant, Atriox and his lieutenants ultimately don't live up to their reputation. They simply don't get much screen time. More to the point, as much as is made of Atriox's multitudes, really only his bestial strength comes through in the game proper. Cutter and Spirit of Fire come into the nice setup he has created and wreck it entirely, without ever really suffering anything but minor speed bumps along the way. More distressingly, not much comes of the fight between Atriox and Cutter as commanders. For most of the game, they never even talk to each other. The Know Your Enemy live-action shorts 343 released have more substance to them than the game itself. Rather than coming to a head, the showdown between them just ends. The game also poses questions it never actually answers, such as just who actually did pluck Spirit of Fire out of deep space and take it to the Ark. Taken together, the game feels like it ends on a cliffhanger, and one that personally comes off as less satisfying than Halo 2's. One final quibble has to do with the setting itself. Halo Wars 2 takes place on the Ark, and a replacement Halo for the one Master Chief keeps slowing up, but they honestly don't feel like places we've seen before. While a lot of fans have been excited to see the classic UNSC designs from the Spirit of Fire return, and they join some very cool brute remixes of classic Halo vehicles, the Ark doesn't get that treatment. Remember all that architecture from Halo 3? There's none of that in this game, instead looking like the 343-styled Tron Runner look we've seen since Halo 4. But this is just a simple case of them waving hands and saying, it's always looked like this, and it hurts the game when we're plopped down in a setting we should recognize, and it's nothing like we can remember. As much as the shortcomings weigh down the campaign though, and as much as we can pine for what might have been, it's worth restating what's actually there is good. Halo Wars 2 will also be the first Halo game to have post-launch campaign DLC, with at least the Banished and UNSC campaign teased from leaked game files, so it's possible some of my concerns will be addressed soon rather than having to wait however many years for a sequel. After all, there remains a buried mendicant bias somewhere on the Ark's surface, and with the Halo 5 legendary ending, I think everyone's debating whether Anders' Halo is the one that Cortana has snatched up and what she plans on doing with it. In the meantime, I'll be playing a lot of Blitz. Thanks for watching our first major video on YouTube for 400 Dawn. This is a short companion video to a longer form written piece which you can find via a link in the description. You can check out more articles at forwarduntodon.com, listen to our recurring podcasts on iTunes or here on YouTube, and subscribe for more content coming.